Welcome to the PR in Lockdown podcast, your guide to PR and communications in a post-lockdown world. Produced by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA. I'm Rob Double, and in this episode, I'm talking to Jim Donaldson, CEO UK and Middle East at FleishmanHillard Fishburne. With 250 staff based in the UK alone, Jim provides an in-depth insight into managing lockdown at scale, from keeping team culture with virtual working to establishing new online offerings for clients in the coming months. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much for coming on. It's great to have you on the podcast. And to start with, just so everyone has a good overview of yourself and also Fleischmann, just give us an overview of the agency and what you guys predominantly do.
Sure. So we're one of the big ones, I guess, somewhere around the top 10 agencies in the UK. About 250 people in London, and then a team in Bristol. And we have been pretty successful in the last few years, but we're a full service agency or part of a global network. Fleischmann has about 85 offices around the world. So we have a healthcare team, a consumer team, public affairs, digital, studio, corporate reputation, tech, etc. So across all the disciplines, sort of full service agency, I guess, would be the best description.
I think such an interesting insight it would be great to get from you is just that you mentioned that the scale, 250 people in the UK, and obviously we're talking UK because we're talking about the lockdown and what happened in the UK. Just initially, give an overview of how you as CEO managed that and managed those 250 people in this really quite significant change in the way everyone's lives were.
Well, I guess the first thing to say was we were amazed, maybe that's too strong a word, surprised by how easy the transition to working from home was. I mean, obviously there are complications around it and tech logistics and various other things, but we all left the office pretty much on a Friday and then got the news that it was locked down, and we were all pretty much working from home as of the Monday. So I pulled together a team, obviously, to help look at all of the issues around that. But we had very strong tech support. So we used Microsoft Teams, and that worked incredibly well. We sort of immediately picked up a familiarity with it, did some training courses around it. And it all happened enormously quickly. And that made a huge difference, I think, to our ability to perform as an agency. One of the many real challenges you have is how to keep everyone engaged. I can't get all 250 people on an all-staff call and expect all of them to be interacting with us. So we put a lot more focus on the individual teams. I have about 10 separate teams within that. So each of them would hold their own regular catch-up. So we moved to having management meetings every week to start off with, so that we made sure everyone could report back on any issues. But
had you been doing any kind of virtual working before this? Was there some preparation in the institution?
Well, so I suppose we were 10 to 20% of the way there, and that helped. And culturally, we felt that we were going to move in that direction more and more, in part to allow people the freedom to really focus when they were working. One of the problems with open plan offices is you end up with a lot of disturbances during the day. So, we were moving in that direction, but suddenly this moved with enormous speed that none of us were expecting.
That's such a key thing, isn't it? Is there was some. I think this is a case in a lot of companies. There was some awareness and some preparation in place to move toward virtual work anyway. But this has provided the tipping point, the nudge to take that 20 to 30% on the way there to the 100%, really, 90%, 100% of people. Just, talking about how you split, you did these weekly management meetings and, keeping engaged with 250 people in the UK. As the CEO, have there been any challenges around managing and leading an organisation of your size virtually? not being able to, tap someone on the shoulder or have a quiet word around the corner or anything like that?
So I would say there have been phases during the lockdown. So what are we in now? Month 4 or 5? 5 probably.
It's all kind of blurred into one for me, so
it has,
I've lost track of time.
It is. It's been such a long period of time. But at the beginning, it was very much around: is everyone okay? Is everyone safe? Is anyone ill? Have we got a touch point to everyone? Our line managers looking after people, so that we were really over communicating both on a macro level, so updating people across the agency from a central point, but also down into the individual teams. So I think at that stage, everyone was just worried about their short-term job security, what was the challenge about doing the work for delivering for our clients, how could people continue to work in this way, and so on. So that I think was probably the first maybe couple of months as you moved into April and May. Then it became reasonably clear, I think, about then that it was going to be, this was the long haul, right? This wasn't something that was going to last for a short period of time. It was going to last a long time. And by that stage, we'd had a couple of good months under our belt. Our performance in April and May was pretty good, given the circumstances. We didn't see a huge fall off of revenue. And then a new set of challenges started coming. So I'll give you one sort of interesting example. We've always had a very flexible approach to the times and the hours that people work, deliberately to support people with kids, with outside interests, to make sure people didn't feel they had to go to the gym at 8 a.m. when everyone else was going to the gym, and maybe they could go to the gym at 11 when no one was going to the gym, and fit their day around their interests, just as to become much more of an employer of choice. It's something we followed for a long time. So one of the consequences of this was particularly people with kids who were trying to manage that incredibly difficult balance of looking after the children, working, feeding, and so on. So quite a lot of the people with young kids would work slightly odd hours. So they'd be working from sort of 7 until 10, and then from 4 until 9 or something. And that was just the way their day worked out. And one of the consequences of that was that people would start to send off email traffic and those sorts of things at strange hours of the day, because that's when they were working. So you'd find a situation where, someone from our finance team or our HR team or whatever was working those hours. Quite a lot of people would get emails at maybe 9 o'clock at night. And that's not a very good moment if you're trying to decompress from a day, to be receiving emails. So we then moved into a phase of trying to understand how all of these things were affecting how people worked. And we've set about a month ago, we put some new rules in motion about no emails outside the hours of 8:30 to 6:30, for example. So if you were working after that, you had to put the emails into your drafts box, and then you could send them the following day. Obviously, in our business, we're dealing with crises all the time, so there are emergencies. But if it was regular rhythm of the day, that we would try and make Wednesday afternoon a day of intense work, so you could focus. So you would try not to have team meetings on Wednesday afternoons, and so on. So a number of guidelines because one of the pieces of feedback I think everyone has seen, but we saw, is that people actually worked more. They worked in a more intense way. They were under more pressure. They didn't have those 30-second, 2-minute moments of relaxation, where you could share a joke or whatever, the way that you would do in an office. And everything is regimented. So if you wanted to turn around to a colleague and say, what do you think about that thing? you can't do that any longer. You contact them. That's why I've been pinging a bit during the call, because people are getting in touch and saying, how about this? How about that? And that never lasts 30 seconds. It always lasts 10 minutes. So people have moved to having these very regimented days. And that was really stressing people out, I think. So that second phase, when we realized our business was okay, the core of what we were doing was okay, we were still delivering great work for our clients. The second phase was really trying to get a new rhythm in place for people to make sure that they didn't suffer and weren't stuck indoors, that we encouraged them to go out and take exercise, all of those sorts of things. Because again, you've got to look after people who often their natural instinct is to be on the screen all day, and that can be very dangerous. One of my colleagues said, and I think a lot of people felt it, that there was a bit of an invasion of home by work. So whereas you had a work premise and a home premise, and every now and then they merged a little bit. You had some fun at work, and you maybe had to do a little bit of work at home for extraordinary reasons. Now work was sort of in the middle of your home life, and that can be disturbing.
From hearing you there, it sounds like your business has actually not been significantly disrupted as a result of lockdown. You were in a good place, or at least the first couple of months of lockdown you seem to be doing well. What kind of services, if any, did you notice, changing in demand, or did you suddenly see a big uptick in certain clients wanting certain things during that lockdown period?
The early signs for us of trouble, if you like, were when some of our consumer marketing clients before lockdown started to pull back a little bit. And we knew that was going to be a challenge for us for a little while. But our healthcare work has been strong throughout. And if you look at all of the results from the big holding companies, and we're part of Omnicom, healthcare has been a very strong sector growing. And so our healthcare team is growing double digit this year, despite COVID. And obviously, as a brand, we're pretty well known for our corporate reputation work and our crisis in issues work. So a lot of that work came in those early phases, particularly around employee comms and some of those areas. The other interesting thing, and sort of a broader point that I think people are generally saying, certainly people I talk to, is that this is the recession where PR was not first, comms was not first on the list of things to chop. I've lived through in my career a number of recessions, unfortunately. We had the financial crisis about 10 years ago, and then there seemed to be about every 10 years. So I lived the early 90s, dot-com boom and bust, financial crisis, and now COVID. And it was very much those first three in my careers. PR was easy to chop at that stage. It was pretty much first on the list, and so the business suffered. Not only did that not happen this time, but we actually saw, as I said, some growth in different parts of the business. And the word that's been abused the most, and I'll try and only use it once because it really annoys me now, is the word pivot. But what clients tended to do, say they were paying a retained amount of money to run a media relations press office with some digital elements to it or whatever, they would come to say, look, we don't have so much to do in that space, but we have a huge need over on our employee communications, dealing with inquiries that come in from our suppliers, understanding what our profile should or shouldn't be digitally, et cetera, et cetera. So they change the services that they want. And we luckily, because we have that breadth of talent, could change how we provided those services. And then, I was going to say, then interestingly, having sort of gone in April and May, we were slightly behind, but I mean, minimal amounts of money in percentages. We're talking very low percentage numbers behind. We actually started to grow in June. I mean, again, small. And that's in part because the consumer marketing clients are back. And they're back because they know that they've got another 6+ months of this and they need to do things a bit differently. And I'm sure have read that the advertising market has really shrunk. All the numbers suggest 25% or so in the second quarter of this year. And I think it's because clients are looking at different ways of communicating to customers, and so turning to areas like PR and digital comms and so on, social media comms, because it's nimble, it starts a conversation, and so on. So we've seen significant growth in those parts of the business too.
From the sounds of it, because you've been doing well, you haven't had to access any of the government schemes like furloughing or having to make any shrinkages in your teams.
We've not made any redundancies. We did do a very small number of furloughs, and that was really because it made sense. So some of our admin people had nothing to admin. Our main media trainer was doing very little media training in the first month. He's now back, and again, that's now become quite a big demand to do virtual training, because clients are having to do more and more interactions with the media virtually. So we did a few of those. I mean, single digits, but it wasn't a massive requirement. It just made logical sense for the people concerned who were at home doing nothing, and we couldn't reapply their skills. But obviously, some people we could completely change the skills use the skills that had to completely change the type of work they were doing during that period. But one of the interesting things, I'm sure you've seen some of the remarks from some of our competitors, particularly the big agency. I guess I shouldn't really name them, but anyway, who came out and said they weren't going to make any redundancies, and then a bit later said they would. And I thought that was very sad. Announced a very heartfelt announcement that they made. But their structure is also different again to Fleischmann's. They have a lot of these big agencies have a number of very, very large multi-million-dollar global assignments. And if we saw a downtick in any part of our business, actually was with the larger clients. The larger big multinationals have been under a lot of pressure, and big spend gets looked at. But if it's a reasonably what we would like as a retainer, but not a massive amount of money, it's been able to be protected by the clients, and the work has been seen as very valuable.
That's really interesting, and we'll talk more after the break about this, the transition into this new normal and what we should expect in the coming few months, and indeed as a long-term thing as well. So don't go anywhere. We're just going to go on a quick break, and then we'll continue chatting just after this. Before the break, we were starting to talk about, your business coming back, and you mentioned the media training stuff, which you've started to come back virtually, and also, some spend picking up as well in that consumer market. Looking at the next 2-3 months, really short-term stuff, where do you see as the really areas of recovery and the areas of real growth in the PR and communications world?
I think, Rob, we will see accelerated growth in the areas that increased in demand in lockdown. So healthcare continues to be very strong. It was strong throughout. I can't see that stopping. And that's pretty much every area of healthcare. So working for big pharma and, on vaccines maybe, but generally on health, but also consumer health, healthcare, public affairs, digital healthcare, et cetera, and turning complex messages into things that communities can understand, whether it's healthcare communities or consumers. And the Congress market, which has traditionally been a very big part of our business, has now gone entirely virtual, and we've developed a whole stream of expertise around that very quickly. So I think that will grow. Employee engagement will definitely grow. How you keep culture, which is one of our issues as a business, how you keep a culture going in the new world, whatever that world will be, is going to be crucial.
How much of your business now is based in the virtual world, and how many of your services have you led the kind of transition to having a virtual offering as well?
That's a big question. So I mean, on the healthcare side, I would say that traditionally, probably a third of our business was around moments in the year. And we have the medical education business as well that does scientific work. So healthcare organizations, pharmaceutical organizations would tend to have big, significant announcements or releasing of clinical trials or whatever it might be at major congresses that are often attended by thousands and thousands of people. So that whole market, and it's clearly going to be affecting the travel industry quite significantly. That whole market has now gone entirely virtual. And so our ability to help clients present at those events, prepare materials that have cut through at those events, train clients on giving speeches at those events. I mean, the skills, in effect, are a tweaking of what we're already doing, like media training. There's some new things that you'd have to learn about when you're doing a virtual interview versus a regular interview. So I think that's an evolution. But if you then look at some of our digital work and our consumer work, clearly a lot of that is going to have to be around developing great content that people want to interact with. And that's probably a significant acceleration of where we were 6 months ago, where there were still stunty type activities going on, and were useful. They were well attended and good opportunities to interact with the media. Now we're having to come up with stories and content that can work in the virtual world. So I would say that it's made a significant leap in our service levels, but at the core of it, and don't get me wrong, we're still doing many of the same things, which is taking great messaging around what our clients are doing, whether it's product or B2B or whatever, and going out and reaching their audiences. Perhaps the channels are different, but the principles of what we do stay the same.
What is your plan for the London office, or are you phasing people in, or are you thinking we'll keep it virtual?
I think the reality is we will be for the short term, if we're talking the next 3 to 6 months, we will remain a predominantly virtual organisation, with the office as a place we could meet should we wish to do so. We've had our first couple of requests to do pitch meetings in person versus online, which is, that's definitely a change in the last couple of weeks. So getting back into the office is what a lot of people want to do, but they want to do it because they miss the things we were talking about earlier, those moments of the 30 seconds, a quick break for a joke, or that human interaction, and that's going to be pretty difficult in a reduced use office. So I think people will perhaps say, why don't we as a little team go in on Thursday and do some work, or us as a pitch team go in and do some work. But I think we're some way away from 250 people being regularly back in the office. I think people really appreciate that we've been very honest with everyone about what's going on, and we continue to over communicate deliberately, and to be available for anyone to come and talk to us. But ultimately, I've relied very strongly on my cadre of senior people who are in direct contact with their own teams, whether it's a team of 30 to 40 people or a team of 10 to 20. And then we have come together as a management team and discussed some of the issues that they're facing inside the teams. And of course, into this first tsunami of lockdown came the second tsunami of Black Lives Matter. And we have a number of black staff, we have a number of BAME staff, and that was a very difficult time for them. It was a very difficult time for pretty much everyone, I think, in London, and in the States. It's still very difficult topic for the industry. So again, we have tried very hard to keep very close to people who are going through some pretty traumatic experiences. And when we come back to the office and go back to the office in some shape or form, we will not be the same agency that left the office in March. And we've had some people join us during lockdown who haven't really met any of their colleagues. We had a graduate intake that arrived a week before lockdown started. And they've coped incredibly well given the circumstances. It's going to be a challenge, carry on being a challenging and interesting time, and certainly one of the biggest managerial challenges I've faced in 30 odd years in this industry.
Is there anything that when you observe and reflect maybe back on the past few months and how it's changed, your company, but also how you see it's changed the industry and the way people are doing communications and the services? Are there any key trends that you're seeing, or is there anything that you've really noticed where you think this is actually going to shake something? This is going to shake this up.
So it's probably two or three things to touch on. The first is geography. So traditionally, there have been a number of big PR hubs in the world, right? West Coast of the States, East Coast of the States, so predominantly San Francisco and LA, and predominantly New York and DC. My firm's actually headquartered in St. Louis in Missouri, so we're a bit different than some of the others. And then London's been a big base, and then maybe Hong Kong and so on. And then there's been offices of the large agencies and local markets in all of the other places around the world. One of the big questions, I think, is what will happen to those hubs? So will they get bigger, more important, more strategic, if you like, because you can have a critical mass in whether it's virtual or semi-virtual as a city, or will in fact you start to have sort of diversification of talent that might all report into a central hub, but will be based all over the place. We've always said as an industry and as an agency that talent is right at the center of everything that we do. And in areas where we know it's difficult to find talent, healthcare being a really obvious one, but tech PR is also a very difficult place to find talent, maybe people will start working from wherever. So I can recruit now for people that can be based pretty much anywhere in the UK. I already have people in Ireland who work for me, and maybe you start to go further afield. So there's a big question around geography within that, and what does that mean, and how do you keep an agency culture going? Why would people want to work for one particular agency over another if your interaction is only virtual? So I don't have the answer, but I think that's a very interesting question. Then for me, another one is around creativity. So how can you be creative? And if you talk to my top creative guy called Kev O'Sullivan, he'll say some of the best work he's seen in the 5 years he's been with us has happened during lockdown because people have been really focused, which I think is quite interesting. But how will the nature of creativity change when human interaction is slightly different? And what does that mean in terms of what clients will demand and want? And will there be a further fragmentation of audiences and different types of creativity for different audiences? So that, I think, is a second one. And then just the concept of work. So this has been such an earthquake on this idea of you get a job, you go to an office, you maybe go out for a few drinks at the end of the day if you're in an office where no one's driving in or whatever, and then you go home again. That's no longer going to be the norm, I think. I mean, it may take a little bit of time to change, but I think our office will become ultimately some sort of pop-in hub. So it'll be a bit more like the tech industry have. So some people may go and work there pretty permanently because that's the way they like to work. Other people may go in once a month for the team meetings and team night out. Other people might go in 1 week to do some intensive work and then leave again. But I think that changes for how we work with our clients, how we work with ourselves, and what a working life is. And again, I wish I had all the answers in the crystal ball because it would be great.
It's one of those ones where we won't know. It'll just be we'll have to look back on it and then go, oh, that's what happened.
But I think, as I said, that our industry has come of age in this 6 months, and that bodes very well for not just the next 6 months, but the next few years.
Jim, if people wanted to get in touch with you, both you personally, but also Fleischman more generally, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can always send me an email. Good old-fashioned email. It feels very old school now, email, doesn't it? But I'm jim.donaldson@fhflondon.co.uk, but I'm also on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I think I'm at jdonaldson1 on Twitter, so people can find me that way. And the more views we can gather from people at the moment and support the industry and support what's happening, the better for us. I think thousands of people are losing their jobs, not just in this country, but around the place. So we're very lucky in that sense, and I think we all know that we're lucky. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn and continue to change as an industry in terms of what happens next. But what's good at the heart of it is people realise that communications, reputation, nimbleness, creativity, the things that are the kind of stalwart parts of our industry are more important than they ever have been, and that's good news.
Jim, thanks so much for coming on the podcast on this episode, and thank you so much for listening to PR in Lockdown. This is, of course, an ongoing series, so if you're liking what you're listening to, which I hope, of course, you are, you can subscribe to us on your preferred podcast library and give us a rating if you're really, really liking what you're listening to. That'd be awesome. But if you prefer video podcasts, you can watch us. Jim and I will be on YouTube. Just search PR in Lockdown, and you'll see our smiling faces there. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. PR in Lockdown is presented by Rob Double, and the guest this episode was Jim Donaldson, CEO UK and Middle East at FleishmanHillard Fishburne. It is created by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA.